I was standing in the kitchen when I found out my entire life had been dismantled behind my back. It was a Tuesday morning in late September. The kind of morning where the light comes in soft through the windows, and you can still smell the coffee you made an hour ago. I was wearing sweatpants and one of those oversized hoodies I used to steal from my husband back when stealing his clothes felt romantic instead of pathetic. My daughter Iris was at school. My son Owen was at press school. The house was quiet in that rare, perfect way that usually made me feel grateful. I wasn't grateful that morning. I had been looking for the insurance paperwork because Owen needed a referral for his speech therapy, and I couldn't find the folder where we kept all the medical documents. I tore through the filing cabinet in our home office, the one we shared, the one that had his business files mixed in with our family stuff. That's when I found the manila envelope tucked behind a stack of old tax returns. It wasn't labeled. It was just sitting there, thick and crisp like it had been placed recently. I pulled it out and opened it without thinking twice because we didn't keep secrets. That's what I thought. We didn't keep secrets. Inside were divorce papers, fully drawn up, dated 2 weeks prior. My name was already on them. His signature was at the bottom in that confident scrawl he used on everything. There was a sticky note on the front page in his handwriting that said give to her after the account transfers clear. I read that line 3 times before my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. The room didn't spin. It didn't go dark. It just went very, very still. Like someone had hit pause on the entire universe, and I was the only thing left moving. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the papers. I sat down hard in his desk chair and kept reading. He was taking everything. The house, the car that was in both our names, the savings account we had built together over 9 years of marriage. Even the joint credit card points we'd been saving to take the kids to Disneyland. He had listed every asset we owned and he had claimed all of it. My name appeared in the paperwork exactly 3 times. Once as the respondent, once as the party being served, and once in a section labeled petitioner requests where it said I would retain sole responsibility for all marital debt. We didn't have debt. Or so I thought. But according to these papers, there was over $47,000 in credit card debt that had apparently been racked up in my name. Cards I didn't even know existed. I sat there staring at the pages until the words stopped making sense. Then I heard the garage door open. He was home early. He never came home early. He worked in medical device sales and his schedule was always packed with client meetings and lunch, appointments and site visits that kept him out until 6 or 7 most nights. But there he was, walking through the door at 11 in the morning, like this was normal. I heard his keys hit the bowl on the counter. Heard his footsteps coming toward the office. I didn't move. I just sat there holding the papers in my lap with my hands still shaking. He appeared in the doorway and stopped. He looked at me, looked at the envelope on the desk, looked at the open filing cabinet. Then he said the only words that mattered. I was going to tell you this weekend. That was it. No panic, no guilt, no scrambling to explain. Just that flat, casual sentence like he'd been planning to mention he was switching gym memberships. His face was calm. Almost bored. Like I was the one being unreasonable for finding out early. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with a man who had made a mistake. I was dealing with someone who had planned this. Someone who had spent weeks, maybe months, setting up my destruction while I packed his lunches, and folded his laundry and kissed him goodnight. I should have screamed. I should have thrown something. But I didn't. I just sat there staring at him, and all I could think was he has no idea what he just did. My name is Marlowe. Marlowe Finch. I know it sounds like something out of a detective novel, but my mother was obsessed with old movies, and my father let her name all 3 of us kids, whatever she wanted. My brothers got off easier, Daniel and Marcus. I got Marlowe. I grew up in a suburb outside of Portland, Oregon. In one of those neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone, and you could leave your bike on the lawn overnight without worrying. My parents divorced when I was 12, but it was amicable. They split everything down the middle, and neither one of them tried to destroy the other. I grew up thinking that's how adults handled things. With fairness, with respect. I met Julian Holt when I was 23. I was working as a medical transcriptionist at a hospital in downtown Portland, spending my days typing up doctor's notes and radiology reports in a windowless office that smelled like burnt coffee and hand sanitizer. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well and I was good at it. I could type 90 words per minute without looking at the keyboard. I took pride in that. In being fast. In being accurate. In being someone people could rely on. Julian was a sales rep for a company that sold imaging equipment to hospitals. He came into our department one afternoon to do a product demonstration, and I was assigned to take notes during the presentation. He was tall and confident in that easy way some men are. He wore expensive shoes. He made jokes that actually landed. When he left, he asked for my number, and I gave it to him without hesitation. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Willamette Valley. My parents were both there. His parents flew in from Boston. We honeymooned in Mexico and came back to a rented duplex in Beaverton that we promised each other was temporary. We would save up. We would buy a house. We would build something real. And we did. For a while, Iris was born 3 years into our marriage. Owen came 2 years after that. We bought the house when I was pregnant with Owen, a 3-bedroom ranch-style place in Tigard with a fenced backyard and a garage Julian immediately filled with tools he never used. I quit my job at the hospital after Iris was born because daycare cost more than I was making and Julian's sales commissions were good. He told me it made sense. He told me I could always go back to work later. I became a stay-at-home mom, and I tried to be proud of it. I joined a mom's group that met at a coffee shop called Daily Grind every Thursday morning. I signed Iris up for swim lessons at the community center. I learned how to make sourdough bread during the pandemic because everyone else was doing it, and I didn't want to be left out. I built a life that looked full from the outside, but something had shifted in Julian. It was slow. So slow I didn't notice it happening until it had already happened. He started working later, coming home with his tie already loosened and his shirt untucked. He stopped asking about my day. Stopped kissing me when he walked in the door. We had sex less and less until it felt like something we were both just crossing off a list. I told myself it was normal. Marriage ebbs and flows. Everyone says that. I told myself he was stressed about work, about money, about being the sole provider. I made excuses for him the way you do when you're too afraid to look at the truth. Then I found the divorce papers, and everything I had been ignoring came crashing down at once. If you're watching this, hit subscribe. I need you to hear what comes next. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to know who's out there listening. The signs were there long before I found those papers. I just didn't want to see them. It started about 8 months before that Tuesday morning in September. Small things. Little dismissals that didn't seem worth fighting over at the time. Julian stopped coming to Iris's swim meets. She was 7 and she was good. Not Olympic level or anything, but good enough that her coach had moved her up to the competitive team. She was so proud of herself. She would come home from practice and tell me about her freestyle time and how she was getting better at flip turns. She would ask when Daddy was coming to watch. I made excuses for him. Work trip, big client meeting, important presentation. But the truth was he just stopped showing up. I would sit in those humid bleachers at the aquatic center with the other parents, and I would feel the weight of being the only one there for her. Other kids had both parents cheering. Iris had me. And she noticed. One Saturday morning after a meet where she placed second in her heat, she asked me why Daddy never came anymore. We were sitting in the car in the parking lot, and she still had her wet hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her goggles had left red marks around her eyes. I told her Daddy was busy, that he was working hard for our family, that he loved her very much. She looked out the window and said okay, but I could tell she didn't believe me. That same month, Julian started criticizing everything I did around the house. The way I folded his shirts. The meals I cooked. The fact that I hadn't vacuumed the living room, even though I had vacuumed it that morning. He would walk in and immediately start pointing out everything that was wrong. One night I made his favorite dinner. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes. I had spent 3 hours on it. I set the table. Poured him a beer. Called the kids to wash their hands. He sat down, took one bite, and said it was too salty. Then he got up and made himself a sandwich. I sat there staring at the pot roast and wanted to cry, but I didn't because the kids were watching. Another time, I asked him if he could pick up Owen from preschool because I had a dentist appointment. Owen got out at noon, and my appointment was at 11:30. Julian said he had a meeting. I asked if he could reschedule it. He said no. He said I should have planned better. I canceled the dentist appointment. I had a cavity that needed filling, and I didn't get it taken care of for another 2 months because I couldn't find another window where someone else could watch Owen. The worst part wasn't the criticism or the absence. It was the way he looked at me. Like I was in the way. Like I was something he had to tolerate instead of someone he had chosen. We stopped talking about anything real. Our conversations became logistics. Who was picking up the kids? What bills were due? Whether we needed milk. We were roommates. Not partners. I started noticing charges on our credit card statement that didn't make sense. Expensive dinners at restaurants I had never been to. Hotel stays in cities he claimed he was visiting for work, but the dates didn't line up with the trips he had told me about. When I asked him about it, he got defensive. He said I didn't understand how sales worked. He said client dinners were part of the job. He made me feel stupid for asking. I dropped it because I didn't want to fight. Because I was tired. Because some part of me already knew the answer, and I wasn't ready to face it. One Thursday morning at Daily Grind, one of the other moms asked how Julian was doing. Her name was Stephanie, and she was always overly cheerful in that way, that made me feel like I was failing at life. I said he was fine. She said she had seen him at a bar downtown the previous weekend with a woman who wasn't me. She said it casually like she was mentioning the weather. I felt my face get hot. I told her it was probably a work colleague. She smiled and said probably. But her tone said she didn't believe it. I went home that day and searched through Julian's phone while he was in the shower. I had never done that before. I didn't find anything. He had deleted everything. But the fact that I felt the need to look told me everything I needed to know. I was losing him. Or maybe I had already lost him and I was just the last one to realize it. The morning I found the divorce papers, I didn't cry right away. I just sat there in his desk chair, staring at him standing in the doorway looking annoyed. Not guilty. Not apologetic. Annoyed. He walked into the office and closed the door behind him, even though we were the only 2 people in the house. He sat down on the edge of the desk and crossed his arms like he was the one who deserved an explanation. I asked him what this was. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. He said it was exactly what it looked like. He was done. He had been done for a while. He said he didn't want to be married anymore, and he didn't see the point in dragging it out. I asked him about the debt. The $47,000 in credit cards I didn't know existed. He shrugged. He said he had opened the accounts in my name because his credit was maxed out. He said he needed them for work expenses, and he was going to pay them off, but things got tight. He said it wasn't a big deal. I stared at him. I asked him how opening credit cards in my name without telling me wasn't a big deal. He said I was overreacting. He said I never understood the financial pressure he was under. He said if I had been working instead of staying home all day, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. That line hit me like a slap. I had quit my job because he told me to. I had given up my career, my income, my independence because he said it made sense for our family. And now he was using it against me. I asked him where he expected me to go. The house was in both our names, but according to the papers he was keeping it. He was keeping the car. He was keeping everything. He said I could stay with my parents. Or my brother. He said I would figure it out. I asked about the kids, about Iris and Owen and how he planned to explain this to them. He said we would share custody. 50-50. But he wanted them during the school year because he had the stable home and the income. I could have them on weekends and holidays. I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart. Something deeper. Something structural. I asked him if there was someone else. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the floor and then back at me and said it didn't matter. That meant yes. I asked who. He said I didn't know her. He said her name was Vanessa, and she worked in hospital administration, and they had been seeing each other for 6 months. He said she understood him in a way I never had. He said she was ambitious-driven. Not content to just stay home and do nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the papers at him. I wanted to ask him who had been raising his children while he was out fucking Vanessa. But I didn't. I just sat there shaking. He stood up and said he was going to stay at a hotel for a few days to give me time to process. He said his lawyer would be in touch. He said we could do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way it was happening. Then he walked out. Just like that. He grabbed a duffel bag from the bedroom, threw some clothes in it, and left. I heard his car pull out of the driveway, and then the house was silent again. I sat in that office for 2 hours. I didn't move. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there holding those papers and trying to understand how the man I had built a life with had turned into someone I didn't recognize. When I finally stood up, my legs were numb. I walked into the kitchen and looked around at the life I had built. The kids' artwork on the fridge. The family calendar on the wall with everyone's schedules color-coded. The coffee maker I used every single morning. He was taking all of it, and he thought I was just going to let him. I didn't tell anyone for 3 days. Not my parents. Not my brothers. Not Stephanie or any of the other moms from Daily Grind. I just went through the motions. I picked up the kids from school. I made dinner. I helped Iris with her homework. I read Owen his bedtime stories. I smiled when I needed to smile, and I kept my voice steady when I needed to talk. But at night, when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, I fell apart. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, and my mind would race through everything. Every moment I had missed. Every red flag I had ignored. Every time I had made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. I thought about the years I had spent folding his laundry, and packing his lunches and supporting his career, while mine disappeared. I thought about the promotions I could have earned if I had stayed at the hospital. The retirement account I could have been building. The independence I had given up because I thought we were a team. We weren't a team. I was a convenience. And the moment I stopped being convenient, he discarded me. On the 4th night, I couldn't sleep at all. I got up at 2 in the morning and went into the kitchen. I made tea I didn't drink and sat at the table in the dark. That's when I remembered something my father had told me when I was 16. I had been devastated because a girl I thought was my best friend had spread a rumor about me at school. Something cruel and untrue that made everyone look at me differently. I came home crying, and my father sat with me at this same kitchen table in our old house, and he said something I had never forgotten. He said people who betray you always assume you're weaker than you are. They assume you'll just take it. And that assumption is their biggest mistake. He said the strongest thing you can do is prove them wrong. Not with anger, not with violence, but with patience, with strategy. With the kind of quiet resolve that catches them off guard. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about Julian sitting in some hotel room with Vanessa thinking he had won. Thinking I would just roll over and let him take everything because I was too soft, too passive, too broken to fight back. He didn't know me at all. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. I looked up divorce laws in Oregon. I read about asset division and debt responsibility and custody agreements. I learned that debt incurred during a marriage is typically considered joint debt unless it can be proven that one party committed fraud. I learned that opening credit cards in someone else's name without their knowledge or consent is illegal. I learned that judges don't look kindly on spouses who try to hide assets or manipulate financial records. I spent the next week going through every piece of paperwork in that filing cabinet. Every bank statement, every credit card bill, every tax return. I made copies of everything. I organized it all into folders with dates and notes. I built a timeline of every suspicious charge, every hidden account, every lie he had told me about where the money was going. And I found things. Things he didn't think I would find. There were transfers from our joint savings account into a separate account I didn't have access to. Thousands of dollars moved over the course of 6 months. There were receipts for jewelry I had never seen, for trips I had never been on, for a lease agreement on an apartment downtown that was signed 4 months ago. He had been planning his exit for a long time. And he had been funding it with our money. I also found something else. Something that changed everything. Julian's company had a strict ethics policy. I knew this because I had read the employee handbook years ago when he first got hired. Sales reps were not allowed to have romantic or financial relationships with clients or anyone employed by client companies. It was considered a conflict of interest. Violations could result in termination. Vanessa worked in hospital administration. At one of Julian's biggest clients, I sat back in the chair and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not the loud, explosive kind. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest and waits. Julian thought he had taken everything. But he had no idea what he had really taken. He had taken the woman who knew where all the bodies were buried, and now I was going to dig them up. I started small. I needed to be smart about this. Emotional reactions would get me nowhere. I needed evidence. I needed leverage. I needed to be 3 steps ahead of him at all times. The first thing I did was open my own bank account. I went to a different bank than the one we used together, and I opened a checking account in just my name. I didn't put much in it, just $300 from some birthday money my mom had given me months ago that I had kept in a drawer. But it was mine. Separate. Untouchable. Then I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I called 3 different family law attorneys and scheduled consultations with all of them. I told each one the same story. I showed them the divorce papers Julian had drawn up. I showed them the credit card statements with my name on accounts I didn't open. I showed them the transfer records from our joint savings into his private account. 2 of the lawyers said it would be messy but winnable. The third lawyer, a woman named Regina Moss, said it would be more than winnable. She said Julian had committed fraud and that I had grounds not just to fight the divorce terms, but to file criminal charges if I wanted to. I hired Regina on the spot. She told me the first step was to freeze everything. We filed an emergency motion to prevent Julian from accessing or moving any more marital assets until the court could review the financial records. We also filed a motion to dispute the debt he had claimed was mine, providing evidence that I had never signed for or authorized those credit cards. Julian's lawyer responded within 48 hours. They called the motions baseless. They said I was being vindictive. They said I was trying to drag out the process to hurt Julian financially. Regina responded by filing a formal discovery request. She demanded every financial record Julian had. Every bank statement, every credit card receipt, every pay stub, every expense report from his job. She demanded access to his phone records and his email. She made it clear we were not playing games. That's when Julian called me. It was the first time I had heard his voice since he walked out. He sounded angry. He said I was making this harder than it needed to be. He said if I kept pushing, he would make sure I never saw the kids again. I told him I would see him in court. Then I hung up. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I started digging into Vanessa. I found her LinkedIn profile. She worked as a director of operations at Mercy General Hospital, one of the largest hospital networks in the Portland area. She had been there for 8 years. Her profile was polished, professional, full of endorsements from colleagues, talking about her leadership and integrity. I wondered if any of those colleagues knew she was sleeping with a married sales rep who sold equipment to her hospital. I didn't reach out to her. Not yet. I just watched. I learned her routines. I found her Instagram, which was public. She posted a lot. Pictures of her morning lights, her yoga classes, her weekend hikes, and recently, pictures of her and Julian. She didn't tag him, but I recognized his hands in some of the shots. His watch. His jacket on the back of a chair. She thought she was being discreet, but she wasn't. I also started asking questions. Casual questions. I reached out to a woman I knew from the hospital, where I used to work. She had moved into an admin role at Mercy General a few years ago. I messaged her on Facebook and asked how she was doing. We chatted for a bit, and then I casually mentioned I had heard Julian was working with some folks at Mercy and asked if she knew him. She said she did. She said he was their main rep for imaging equipment and that he came by pretty often. She said he was charming. Everyone liked him. I asked if she knew anyone named Vanessa in operations. She said yes. She said Vanessa was her boss. I asked if they were close. She said not really, but Vanessa was good at her job. Very focused. Very ambitious. She said Vanessa had been acting a little different lately though. Distracted. Happier. She joked that Vanessa was probably seeing someone. I thanked her and ended the conversation. Then I sat back and thought about my next move. Julian had built his career on relationships, on trust, on being the guy everyone liked, and he had violated every ethical boundary his company had in place. If his employer found out he was in a romantic relationship with a decision maker at one of his largest clients, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be a termination, and Vanessa would lose her job too. Hospital administration didn't tolerate conflicts of interest, especially not ones that could open them up to accusations of favoritism or kickbacks. I didn't act right away. I couldn't. I needed to time this perfectly, but I felt the pieces falling into place. The court date for our first year's hearing was set for mid-November. Regina said it would mostly be procedural. The judge would review the emergency motions and decide whether to grant temporary orders freezing the assets. She said it was likely we would win, but nothing was guaranteed. I was terrified. I had never been to court for anything. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I could hold it together in front of a judge. The week before the hearing, Julian's lawyer sent over a new settlement offer. It was slightly better than the original divorce papers, but not by much. He was offering me 20% of the home equity and half of the joint savings account, which by now had less than $8,000 in it, because of all his transfers. He still wanted full custody of the kids during the school year, and he still expected me to take on half of the credit card debt. Regina said it was insulting. She said we were going to fight for everything. I trusted her, but I was scared. Julian had money for a good lawyer. I was paying Regina with what little I had left, and I didn't know how long I could afford to keep fighting. Then something happened that almost broke me. Iris came home from school one afternoon in late October and she was quiet. Too quiet. I asked her what was wrong and she didn't answer. I asked again and she started crying. She said Julian had picked her up from school that day. He wasn't supposed to. It wasn't his day. But he had shown up and signed her out and taken her to get ice cream. She said he told her that mommy and daddy were getting divorced and that it was my fault. He said I was being difficult. He said I was trying to take his money and keep him away from his kids. He had told our 7-year-old daughter that I was the villain. I held her while she cried and I told her that wasn't true. I told her mommy and daddy were having grown-up problems, but it wasn't her fault, and it wasn't my fault, and she didn't need to worry about any of it. I told her she was loved. I told her everything was going to be okay. But inside, I was screaming. He had crossed a line. He wasn't just trying to take my money. He was trying to turn my children against me. I called Regina immediately. She said what he did was parental alienation, and it was taken very seriously by family courts. She said we needed to document everything. She told me to write down exactly what Iris said, word for word with the date and time. I did. and I saved it. The hearing in November went better than I expected. The judge, an older woman named Judge Callahan, reviewed the financial records and the evidence of the fraudulent credit cards. She listened to both lawyers. Then she granted our motion. She froze all marital assets. She ordered Julian to stop making any transfers or large purchases until the divorce was finalized. She also ordered him to provide a full accounting of every expense he had charged to the credit cards in my name. Julian's lawyer tried to argue that I had benefited from those expenses too, that the charges were for family expenses. But Regina had already anticipated that. She had gone through every single charge and highlighted the ones that were clearly personal. The jewelry. The hotel rooms. The dinners for two at expensive restaurants while I was at home with the kids eating spaghetti. Judge Callahan wasn't impressed. She told Julian's lawyer that if he wanted to claim those were legitimate marital expenses, he would need to provide receipts and explanations. Otherwise, she was inclined to believe they were fraudulent. We walked out of that courthouse, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Julian started playing dirty. He hired a private investigator to follow me. I didn't know at first. But then I started noticing a car parked across the street from my house at odd hours. I started seeing the same man at the grocery store, at the kids' school, at Daily Grind. Regina said it was common in contentious divorces. He was trying to find something he could use against me. Proof I was unstable or negligent or unfit. He wouldn't find anything, but it rattled me. I felt watched, paranoid. I started second, guessing everything I did. One night, I almost gave up. I sat in my car in the driveway after putting the kids to bed, and I thought about just taking his settlement offer. About ending the fight. About moving on and rebuilding my life without dragging this out any longer. But then I thought about Iris crying in my arms. About Julian telling her I was the bad guy. About the years I had spent building a life he was now dismantling without remorse. I couldn't let him win. Not like this. By December, I had everything I needed. Regina had finished compiling the financial records. We had a full accounting of every fraudulent charge, every hidden transfer, every lie Julian had told. We had proof that he had opened credit cards in my name without my knowledge. We had proof that he had siphoned money from our joint accounts into private accounts I couldn't access. We had documentation of his relationship with Vanessa and the ethical violations it represented. It was time to act. The first move was strategic. Regina filed a motion to not only contest the divorce terms, but to pursue criminal fraud charges against Julian for identity theft and financial fraud. She also filed a motion to request full custody of the children based on his attempts at parental alienation. His lawyer lost his mind. He sent a 10-page response accusing me of being vindictive, manipulative, and mentally unstable. He said I was weaponizing the legal system to hurt Julian out of spite. He said I was lying about the credit cards to avoid responsibility for marital debt. Regina responded with one sentence: prove it. And he couldn't. Because it was all true. The second move was more personal. I had been sitting on the information about Julian and Vanessa's relationship for months. I had been waiting for the right moment. That moment was now. I drafted an email. It was professional, factual, no emotion. I addressed it to the Human Resources Department at Julian's company and the Compliance Office at Mercy General Hospital. The email to Julian's company outlined the relationship between Julian and Vanessa and cited the specific section of their employee handbook that prohibited romantic relationships with clients. I attached screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram posts showing them together. I attached receipts from dinners Julian had charged to his corporate card that took place on evenings he claimed he was meeting with clients alone. I attached everything. The email to Mercy General was similar. I explained that one of their senior administrators was in a romantic relationship with a vendor, and that this relationship posed a conflict of interest. I included the same evidence. I also noted that Julian's company had been awarded several large contracts with Mercy General in the past year and suggested they might want to review whether those contracts were awarded fairly. I didn't sign my name. I sent both emails from a burner account I had created specifically for this purpose. I didn't want it traced back to me. I just wanted the information out there. Then I waited. It took less than a week. Julian called me in a panic. He was furious. He said someone had reported him to his company and that he was under investigation. He said he knew it was me. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He said I was a liar. I said he should be careful about throwing that word around given his track record. He hung up on me. 2 days later, I got a message from my contact at Mercy General. She said there was chaos in the admin office. She said Vanessa had been put on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. She said no one knew exactly what happened, but the rumor was that Vanessa had been involved in something unethical with a vendor. I didn't respond. I just smiled. By the end of December, Julian had been fired. His company concluded that he had violated their ethics policy and terminated his employment immediately. Without his income, he couldn't afford the lawyer he had hired. Without his job, he couldn't make the argument that he was the more stable parent. Vanessa was fired too. Mercy General determined that her relationship with Julian had influenced purchasing decisions and that she had failed to disclose a conflict of interest. Her career in hospital administration was over. And just like that, the foundation of Julian's entire strategy collapsed. The final court hearing was scheduled for late January. By that point, Julian was desperate. He had hired a cheaper lawyer. He had moved out of the apartment downtown and into a friend's basement. He had gone from being the confident man who thought he could take everything to someone scrambling to hold on to anything. Regina and I walked into that courtroom with a binder 3 inches thick. It contained every piece of evidence we had gathered. Every fraudulent charge. Every hidden account. Every unethical decision. Every lie. Julian sat on the other side of the room with his lawyer looking exhausted. He wouldn't look at me. Judge Callahan reviewed everything. She asked questions. She looked at the bank statements. She looked at the credit card agreements. She looked at the timeline of transfers and purchases. She looked at the screenshots of Vanessa's Instagram posts. She looked at the termination letters from both Julian's company and Mercy General. Then she made her ruling. She found that Julian had committed financial fraud by opening credit cards in my name without my consent. She ruled that all debt associated with those cards was his sole responsibility. She ordered him to pay me back for every dollar he had transferred out of our joint accounts without my knowledge. She awarded me full ownership of the house. She said that since Julian had attempted to hide assets and manipulate the financial records, he had forfeited his claim to marital property. She awarded me primary custody of Iris and Owen. She said Julian's attempts to alienate the children from me demonstrated poor judgment, and that until he could prove he was acting in their best interest, his custody would be limited to supervised visitation every other weekend. And then she did something I didn't expect. She ordered Julian to pay my legal fees. All of them. She said that his fraudulent actions had forced me to defend myself in court, and that he should bear the cost of that defense. Julian's lawyer tried to object. He said the ruling was too harsh. Judge Callahan cut him off. She said that Julian had lied, manipulated, and stolen from his own wife, and that he was lucky she wasn't referring the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The courtroom was silent. I sat there trying to process what had just happened. Regina squeezed my hand under the table. We had won. Not just won, we had obliterated him. Julian walked out of that courtroom without looking back. I never saw him again in person. He moved to Seattle a few months later. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was working in car sales and living in a studio apartment. Vanessa left Portland too. I don't know where she went, and I don't care. The house was mine. The kids were mine. My name was cleared, and Julian was left with nothing but the consequences of his own choices. Life didn't go back to normal right away. I'm not sure it ever fully did. But slowly, things started to feel manageable again. I kept the house. I refinanced the mortgage in just my name, and the payments were tight, but I could handle them. I went back to work part-time doing medical transcription from home. It wasn't the career I had imagined for myself, but it paid the bills, and it gave me flexibility to be there for the kids. Iris and Owen adjusted better than I thought they would. Kids are resilient. They asked about their dad sometimes, but not as much as I expected. Julian called them every few weeks, but the conversations were short and awkward. He sent child support payments when the court made him, but nothing extra. He had become a stranger to them. I left the moms group at Daily Grind. I couldn't sit there anymore listening to Stephanie talk about her perfect marriage and her perfect life. I needed space from all of it. I started going to a different coffee shop across town where no one knew me. I also started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Linden, and she was patient and kind, and she never made me feel weak for struggling. I talked to her about everything. About the betrayal. About the anger. About the fear that I would never be able to trust anyone again. She told me that healing wasn't linear. That some days would be better than others. That it was okay to still feel hurt even after winning in court. That revenge doesn't erase pain, it just balances the scales. She was right. I still thought about Julian sometimes. Not with longing or sadness, but with something closer to pity. He had thrown away a family for a woman who didn't stand by him when things got hard. He had destroyed his career for short-term gratification. He had lost everything that mattered because he couldn't see past his own ego. I didn't feel sorry for him. But I didn't hate him anymore either. He had become irrelevant. One Saturday morning in early spring, I was sitting on the back porch watching Iris and Owen play in the yard. Iris was practicing cartwheels. Owen was digging in the dirt looking for worms. The sun was warm. The air smelled like cut grass. I realized I was happy. Not the loud, overwhelming kind of happy. Just the quiet, steady kind. The kind that comes from knowing you survived something you didn't think you could survive. I had built a new life. Not the one I had planned. But mine. There's a quote I read somewhere once that says the best revenge is living well. I used to think that was naive. I used to think revenge had to be loud and dramatic and destructive. But now I understand it differently. Julian thought taking everything from me would break me. He thought I would crumble under the weight of his betrayal. He thought I was weak, because I had spent years putting his needs before my own. He was wrong. The revenge wasn't just in exposing his lies or taking back what was mine. It was in refusing to stay broken. It was in rebuilding my life piece by piece until I became someone stronger than the woman he had tried to destroy. He lost his job, his reputation, his family, and his future. Not because I destroyed him, because he destroyed himself. I just made sure everyone else could see it. Some people might say I went too far. That I should have taken the high road. But the high road doesn't pay your legal fees. It doesn't protect your children. It doesn't hold people accountable for the damage they cause. I don't regret any of it. Not the emails. Not the court filings. Not the months of sleepless nights spent gathering evidence. Because in the end, I didn't just win in court. I won my life back. Iris is 10 now. Owen is 7. They're happy. They're thriving. They don't ask about their father much anymore. They know I'm here. That I've always been here. That I always will be, and me, I'm still figuring things out. I'm still healing. But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of being alone. Not of starting over. Not of the future. Julian thought he was taking everything, but he had no idea what he was really taking. He was taking the version of me that needed him. That depended on him. That believed his lies. And in doing so, he created someone he should have been terrified of all along. If this story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you're stronger than anyone who underestimates you. Thanks for listening.